21 years ago, a rugged cowboy named Jake Thornton found a white horse bleeding out in a Montana ravine. Most men would have put the animal down. Jake spent 3 months nursing her back to health. They called her Ghost, and for 5 years she was his constant companion across the ranchlands. Then one winter she vanished without a trace. Jake searched for weeks, but Ghost was gone. He never forgot her. 2 decades later, Jake returns to his hometown for his father's funeral. A worn-down man carrying the weight of a hard life. What happens when he walks past the old county fairgrounds will stop him in his tracks. Can a horse remember a man after 21 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The highway stretched out before Jake Thornton like a ribbon of regret, each mile marker counting down the distance to a place he'd sworn never to return. Ironwood, Montana, population 3,847, the town where he'd been born, raised, and eventually broken. His truck rattled over the cattle guard at the county line, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. 16 years, that's how long he'd stayed away. 16 years of construction jobs in Denver, of small apartments that never felt like home, of holidays spent alone because going back meant facing everything he'd left behind. But death has a way of settling accounts. The call had come 3 days ago. Claire's voice, older somehow, worn thin by years of responsibility he'd never shared. "Dad's gone, Jake. Heart attack. Funeral's on Saturday." A pause, heavy with unspoken accusations. "I know you probably won't come, but I thought you should know." He'd surprised them both by saying he'd be there. The landscape hadn't changed. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass, mountains rising purple in the distance, the big sky that gave Montana its nickname stretching from horizon to horizon. Jake had forgotten how beautiful it was. Or maybe he'd forced himself to forget, because remembering made the leaving harder. His mind drifted back, as it always did when he let his guard down, to 21 years ago. He'd been 28 then, working the family ranch, still believing his father might someday say he was proud of him, still believing he belonged somewhere. It had been March, the tail end of a brutal winter. Jake had been checking fence lines in the north pasture when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong, weak, desperate. He'd followed it to a ravine where the winter runoff had carved the earth into steep walls of mud and rock. That's where he found her. The white mare lay at the bottom, one leg bent at an impossible angle, blood darkening her coat. Her eyes rolled with pain and fear, but when Jake climbed down to her, something passed between them. A recognition, a plea. Most ranchers would have put her down. Samuel Thornton, Jake's father, had said as much when Jake hauled her back to the barn on a makeshift sled. "That horse is a lost cause, son. Kindest thing would be a bullet." But Jake had looked into those dark eyes and seen something worth saving. 3 months, that's how long it took. 3 months of sleeping in the barn, of changing bandages, of coaxing her to stand on 3 legs while the 4th healed. 3 months of talking to her in the quiet hours before dawn, telling her stories about the ranch, about his dreams, about all the things he never told anyone else. They called her Ghost. Claire had named her, said it was because she was white as snow and had nearly died. But Jake thought it was more than that. Ghost moved like smoke across the pastures, silent and otherworldly. And she'd come back from the edge of death like a spirit refusing to be claimed. For 5 years, Ghost was his constant companion. They worked the ranch together, rode the high country in summer, spent long winter evenings in the barn while Jake worked on tack and Ghost dozed in her stall. She was more than a horse. She was proof that something broken could be made whole again. Then she disappeared. It had been January, a blizzard howling down from Canada. Jake had checked the horses at sundown. Everything secure, gates latched, Ghost in her stall, nickering softly as he said goodnight. By morning, she was gone. The gate stood open, swinging in the wind. Snow had already covered any tracks. Jake searched for 3 weeks, rode every trail, checked every canyon, called until his voice gave out. But Ghost had vanished as completely as her name suggested. Samuel said she'd run off, that some horses went wild again. Claire thought she might have been taken by a mountain lion. Jake blamed himself for not checking the latch twice, for not sleeping in the barn that night. Eventually, he stopped searching. But he never stopped remembering. 2 years after Ghost disappeared, Jake left Ironwood. The official reason was work, better opportunities in Denver. The real reason was harder to name. It was the way his father looked at him like he'd failed some essential test. It was the empty stall in the barn that no other horse could fill. It was waking up every morning in a place full of ghosts. Now, driving into town, Jake felt like a ghost himself. Insubstantial, disconnected. A man going through the motions of a life that didn't quite fit. The town hadn't changed much. Miller's feed store still anchored Main Street. The Copper Bell Diner still had its neon sign, though one letter flickered now. New houses had sprouted on the east side, and the old movie theater had become an antique mall, but the bones of Ironwood remained the same. Jake pulled up to the ranch just before sunset. The house looked smaller than he remembered, the paint more faded, but the barn still stood solid, and the mountains still rose behind it like guardians. Claire waited on the porch. She'd aged well, though lines bracketed her mouth that hadn't been there 16 years ago. Her hair, once long and dark, was cut short and showed threads of silver. She wore jeans and a work shirt, boots scuffed from years of ranch labor. "You came," she said. "Not quite a question, not quite an accusation. I said I would." They stood there, an ocean of unspoken words between them. Finally, Claire descended the steps and pulled him into a brief, awkward hug. She smelled like hay and horse and home. "Funeral's tomorrow at 2. Pastor Williams is doing the service. Half the county will be there." She stepped back, studying his face. "You look tired, Jake. Long drive." "That's not what I mean." No, it wasn't. Jake knew what she saw. A man worn down by years of living without purpose, of drifting through days that all looked the same. He was 50 now, his hands calloused from construction work, his body still strong but carrying the weight of accumulated disappointments. "Come inside," Claire said. "I made coffee." The house felt empty without Samuel's presence. His father had been a big man, broad-shouldered and hard-handed, filling rooms with his certainty. Now those rooms echoed. They sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak where Jake had eaten thousands of meals. Claire poured coffee from the same pot their mother had used before cancer took her 12 years ago. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. "How long are you staying?" Claire asked. "Just through tomorrow. I need to get back to Denver by Monday." Something flickered across her face. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation, of course. "Your life is there now." Jake didn't correct her, though calling what he had in Denver a life felt generous. It was an existence. Wake up, work, come home to an empty apartment, repeat. He had acquaintances but no real friends. Dated occasionally but nothing stuck. The construction company valued his skills but wouldn't miss him if he left tomorrow. "Tell me about Dad," he said, changing the subject. "The heart attack. Was it sudden?" Claire wrapped her hands around her mug. "He was checking the south fence. Found him that evening when he didn't come in for supper. Doc said it was massive. He probably didn't suffer." Jake tried to feel something. Grief, loss, even anger. But there was only a hollow ache where emotions should have been. He'd buried his father years ago, the moment he'd driven away from Ironwood. This funeral would just make it official. "He talked about you, you know," Claire said softly. "More in the last few years. Wondered how you were doing. If you were happy." "Did he? Don't do that. Don't make him the villain." Claire's voice had an edge now. "He was a hard man, Jake, but he loved us in his way. And after you left, after Mom died, he softened some. Too late, maybe, but he did." Jake said nothing. He wasn't ready to forgive Samuel Thornton, wasn't sure he ever would be. The old man had measured love in acres worked and cattle raised, in sons who stayed and carried on the family name. Jake had failed that test by every measure. They talked for another hour, catching up on 16 years in carefully neutral tones. Claire had never married, had devoted herself to the ranch. She spoke matter-of-factly about the work, the challenges, the small victories. She didn't mention that she'd done it all alone, but the accusation hung in the air between them. By 9 o'clock, exhaustion had settled into Jake's bones. Claire showed him to his old room, unchanged except for dust and the passage of time. His high school rodeo trophies still lined the shelf. His bed, narrow and hard, waited beneath the window that looked out toward the barn. "There's something else," Claire said from the doorway. "Tom Whitaker is back in town. Opened a veterinary practice on Main Street. He's been asking about you for years." Tom, Jake's best friend from childhood, the one person who'd understood why he had to leave, even if he hadn't agreed with it. They'd lost touch after a few years, the way people do when distance and different lives get in the way. "I'll look him up before I head back," Jake said, though he wasn't sure he would. After Claire left, Jake lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, wind moving through the eaves, the creak of old wood settling. Sounds he'd grown up with, sounds that had once meant home. Sleep came fitfully, and with it, dreams. In them, he was back in the barn with Ghost. She nuzzled his shoulder as he worked, her breath warm against his neck. They rode through the high meadows, the summer sun bright overhead, the world spread out below them like a promise. Then the dream shifted, as dreams do. He was searching through snow, calling her name, finding only empty space where she should have been. He woke before dawn, his heart pounding, Ghost's name on his lips. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles and condolences. Jake shook hands and accepted hugs from people who remembered him as a boy, but looked at him now with curious eyes, wondering what kind of man he'd become. By 1 o'clock, Jake needed air. He told Claire he was going for a walk, would be back in time for the funeral. She nodded, distracted by last-minute details. He walked without direction at first, letting his feet choose the path. It wasn't until he found himself on Main Street that he realized where he was heading. Past Miller's Feed, past the Copper Bell, toward the county fairgrounds at the edge of town. The fairgrounds had been there since Jake was a kid. Every summer they hosted the county fair, rodeos, 4-H competitions. The rest of the year it served as a community gathering place, the buildings rented out for events, the paddocks used for various purposes. Jake was just passing by, his mind on the funeral ahead, when he heard it. A whinny, high and clear, distinctive. He stopped cold. It couldn't be. After 21 years there was no way. His mind was playing tricks, grief and nostalgia combining to create phantom sounds. But then it came again, and Jake's heart, that organ that had felt so hollow for so long, began to pound like it was trying to break free from his chest. He turned toward the sound, his legs moving before his brain could catch up. Through the fence rails he could see horses in the distant paddock, several bays, a paint, and there, in the back, a flash of white. Jake's breath caught. The white horse stood apart from the others, head raised, ears forward. Even from this distance, even after all these years, something about the way she held herself made Jake's throat tighten. He moved closer to the fence, his hands gripping the rough wood. The horse's head swiveled toward him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across 50 yards of dusty ground. Then the white horse began to move, not running, but walking with purpose, head still raised, eyes fixed on Jake. The other horses scattered out of her way. She moved through them like smoke, exactly the way Ghost had always moved. Jake's hands were shaking. It couldn't be. Horses didn't live 26 years and still look that strong. Didn't disappear for 2 decades and reappear in the same town. It was impossible. But the horse kept coming, and with each step, Jake's rational mind lost ground to something deeper. Recognition that lived in the body, not the brain, a knowing that bypassed logic entirely. The horse reached the fence and stopped 3 feet away, white coat gleaming in the afternoon sun, dark eyes fixed on Jake's face, and there, on her left shoulder, barely visible through the coat, a crescent-shaped scar. The scar Ghost had gotten in the ravine, the scar Jake had cleaned and bandaged every day for 3 months, the scar that had become as familiar to him as his own hands. Ghost. The word came out broken, barely a whisper. The horse's ears flicked forward. She took 1 step closer, then another. Her nostrils flared, taking in his scent. And then she did something that made Jake's knees nearly buckle. She pressed her forehead against his chest, right over his heart, The way she'd done 1,000 times before. The way she'd done when he'd talked to her in the barn, when he'd saddle her for a ride, when he'd simply needed the comfort of her presence. Jake's hands came up to cradle her head, his fingers finding the familiar shape of her skull, the soft spot behind her ears. His vision blurred with tears he hadn't shed in years. "Oh God," he breathed. "Ghost, where have you been, girl? Where have you been?" The horse pressed harder against him, trembling. A sound came from deep in her chest, something between a whinny and a sigh. Her entire body seemed to relax, as if she'd been carrying tension for 21 years and could finally let it go. Jake buried his face in her mane. She smelled like hay and horse and something indefinable that he'd never quite forgotten. Memories flooded through him, long rides through the mountains, winter mornings in the barn. The way she'd nick her when he approached, the way she'd follow him around like a dog, the way she'd saved him just as surely as he'd saved her. "Excuse me?" Jake jerked back, suddenly aware that he was crying openly, his arms wrapped around a horse's neck, making a spectacle of himself. He swiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. An elderly woman stood a few feet away, regarding him with curiosity and something that might have been understanding. She wore jeans and a faded t-shirt that read Ironwood County Fairgrounds, her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I'm sorry," Jake managed. "I was just passing by, and this horse." "She." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You know Blanca?" the woman asked. "Blanca? That's what we call her. Spanish for white. She came to us about 15 years ago from a rescue operation down in Wyoming." The woman moved closer, her eyes moving between Jake and the horse. "Though I don't think I've ever seen her react to anyone like this. Usually she's standoffish, gentle with the riders but distant, if that makes sense." Jake's mind was reeling. 15 years here. That meant 6 years unaccounted for. Where had Ghost been during that time, and how had she ended up at a rescue operation? "Her name is Ghost," Jake heard himself say. "I found her 21 years ago in a ravine, nursed her back to health. We were together for 5 years, and then she disappeared one night during a blizzard." He looked at the woman. "I've been looking for her ever since, or I did for a long time, until I gave up." The woman's eyebrows rose. 21 years? That would make her, what, 26, 27? She studied the horse with new appreciation. "She doesn't look it. Still strong, still healthy." Ghost or Blanca, or whoever she was now, hadn't moved from Jake's side. Her head rested over his shoulder, her warm breath on his neck. It was the most natural thing in the world, and also completely impossible. "I'm Ruth Chandler," the woman said. "I manage the fairgrounds. We run a therapeutic riding program here, mostly for veterans. Blanca's one of our best therapy horses. She's got a gift for reading people, knowing what they need. Veterans, therapy." Jake tried to process this information. Ghost had spent the last 15 years helping people heal. Something about that felt right, felt like her. "Can I see her records?" Jake asked. "Her medical history? Anything that might tell me where she's been?" Ruth studied him for a long moment. "Tell you what, come by my office. I've got all her paperwork. And maybe you can tell me more about this horse's past. If she's really been alive for 26 years and survived God knows what between then and now, I'd like to know the whole story." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. Ghost pressed against him once more, and he could feel her heart beating, strong and steady, proof that miracles sometimes happened in the most unlikely ways. Ruth's office was a small room attached to the main fairgrounds building, walls covered with photos of horses and riders, ribbons from past competitions, and a calendar marking therapy sessions. She gestured for Jake to sit while she pulled a thick file from a metal cabinet. "Here," she said, setting it on the desk between them. "Everything we have on Blanca." Jake opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page was a transfer document dated 15 years ago. Owner, Mountain Valley Horse Rescue, Wyoming. The horse had been surrendered to them by a rodeo contractor who'd found her unmanageable. Before that, a breeding farm. Before that, a rancher. The documents went back and back, a trail of ownership that painted a picture Jake didn't want to see. 6 owners in 6 years. Each one had passed Ghost along, unable or unwilling to keep her. "She was difficult," Ruth said quietly. That's what every transfer note says. Wouldn't bond, wouldn't settle, tried to escape constantly. The rescue operation was her last chance. They worked with her for 2 years before they contacted us. Said she needed a purpose, needed to feel useful. That's when we brought her into the therapy program. Jake's hands tightened on the papers. Ghost hadn't been difficult. She'd been looking for him, for home. And instead she'd been passed from stranger to stranger, each one seeing her behavior as a problem rather than what it was: grief, loyalty, love. There's more, Ruth said. She pulled out a separate folder, older and more worn. This came with her from the rescue. It's from the first owner, the man who found her. Jake opened it. Inside was a veterinary report dated 20 years ago. The location made his blood run cold, 15 miles from Ironwood. The date, 3 weeks after Ghost had disappeared. The report detailed treatment for exposure and malnutrition. The examining vet noted the horse was heavily pregnant and in distress. The finder, Dalton Reed, listed as a horse trader. Dalton Reed, Jake said, the name bitter on his tongue. I remember him. He used to come through Ironwood buying horses. You think he took her? Jake's mind raced back to that January night. The blizzard, the open gate. He'd assumed Ghost had wandered off, that he'd failed to secure the latch properly. But what if someone had opened it deliberately? What if Reed had been watching, waiting, had seen a valuable white mare and decided to acquire her? She was pregnant, Jake said, his voice hollow. The report says she was pregnant. Ruth nodded. She gave birth 3 months after Reed found her. A colt. According to these records, Reed sold them separately. The mare went to a rancher looking for breeding stock. The colt went to someone in Wyoming. Jake felt like he'd been punched. Ghost had been pregnant when she disappeared. Had been carrying a foal, Jake's legacy and hers combined, and he'd never known. She'd been stolen, not lost. And then she'd been sold, separated from her baby, passed from hand to hand like property rather than the living, feeling creature she was. I need some air, Jake said, standing abruptly. Outside he found Ghost still at the fence, as if she'd been waiting. When she saw him, she nickered softly. Jake climbed through the rails and went to her, wrapping his arms around her neck. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, Ghost, I'm so sorry. I should have kept looking, should have known you didn't just run away. I failed you. The horse pressed against him, and in that moment, Jake felt the full weight of 21 years, all the time lost, all the suffering both of them had endured, all because one winter night a thief had seen an opportunity and taken it. Rage burned through him, hot and clean. Rage at Dalton Reed, rage at every person who'd seen Ghost as disposable, rage at himself for giving up the search, for leaving Ironwood, for building a life that wasn't really a life at all. But beneath the rage was something else, a purpose, a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He was done running, done drifting, done pretending that the empty apartment in Denver was where he belonged. Ruth appeared beside him. She remembers you, she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, she does. What are you going to do? Jake looked at Ghost, at the white mare who'd survived 21 years of hardship and still had enough heart to work with wounded veterans, to offer healing to others, even as she carried her own scars. I'm staying, he said. However long it takes, I'm not leaving her again. Ruth smiled. Good, because she's been waiting for you. I can see it now. All these years she's been waiting. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Where are you? Funeral starts in 30 minutes. The funeral. His father. For a moment Jake had forgotten entirely. He looked at Ghost, then back at his phone. I have to go, he told Ruth. But I'll be back tonight, tomorrow, every day, whatever Ghost needs. Take your time, Ruth said. She's not going anywhere. Not anymore. Jake pressed his forehead to Ghost's one more time, breathing in her familiar scent, feeling her solid warmth. I'll be back, he promised. I swear it. As he walked away, he heard her whinny. Not distressed, but acknowledging. A sound that said she believed him. Jake made it to the church with 5 minutes to spare. Claire shot him a look that said they'd be having words later, but for now she just handed him the program and led him to the front pew. The service passed in a blur. Pastor Williams spoke about Samuel Thornton's dedication to the ranch, his commitment to the community, his love for his family. People came forward to share memories, painting a picture of a man Jake barely recognized, a man who'd helped neighbors during hard times, a man who'd served on the town council, a man who'd apparently spent his last years talking about his son who'd moved to Denver. Jake sat through it all, feeling disconnected from the proceedings. His mind was at the fairgrounds with Ghost. His heart was 21 years in the past, then here in the present, then somewhere in the future he was just beginning to imagine. When it was time for family to speak, Claire looked at him expectantly. Jake stood, moved to the podium, and looked out at the sea of faces. People who'd known him as a boy, people who'd watched him leave, people who probably wondered why he'd bothered coming back. "My father was a complicated man," Jake began. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, rough with emotion that had nothing to do with Samuel Thornton and everything to do with a white horse waiting at the fairgrounds. He believed in hard work and the land. He believed in duty. He believed in staying, in putting down roots, in being there when you were needed. Jake paused, the words catching in his throat. "I didn't understand that when I left. I thought leaving was the brave thing, the necessary thing. I was wrong. My father knew something I'm only just learning. Home isn't a place you escape from. It's a place you fight for. A place you return to, no matter how long you've been gone." He looked at Claire, saw tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. Sorry I wasn't here when he needed me. But I'm here now, and I'm staying." The words hung in the air, a vow made public, a bridge burned behind him. Jake sat down, and Claire reached over to squeeze his hand. After the burial, after the reception, after the last casserole had been delivered and the last neighbor had gone home, Jake told Claire everything. About finding Ghost, about the records showing she'd been stolen, about her colt sold and separated from her, about the therapeutic riding program and the 15 years Ghost had spent helping others heal. Claire listened without interrupting, and when Jake finished, she said, "So you're really staying?" "I am." "What about your job, your apartment?" "I'll call tomorrow. Give notice. Pack up." "Won't take long." Jake looked around the kitchen, at the ranch visible through the window. "Everything I need is here. Everything that matters." Claire nodded slowly. "Okay then. Welcome home, brother." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in his old bed watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling, thinking about Ghost waiting at the fairgrounds, thinking about the colt she'd born and lost, thinking about the life they might still build together if he could just figure out how. By dawn, he had a plan. It wasn't complete, wasn't certain, but it was a start. And for the first time in 16 years, Jake Thornton felt like he had something worth fighting for. The next morning, Jake was at the fairgrounds before sunrise. Ghost stood in her paddock, a pale shape in the pre-dawn light, and when she saw him, she moved to the fence as if she'd been expecting him. "Morning, girl," Jake said softly, running his hands along her neck. She leaned into his touch, eyes half closed. For a moment, they simply stood together, relearning each other. Ruth arrived an hour later, coffee in hand and a knowing smile on her face. "Figured I'd find you here. Hope that's okay." "More than okay. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." She leaned against the fence, watching Ghost. "We run the therapeutic riding program 3 days a week. Mostly veterans, some folks dealing with other trauma. We're always looking for volunteers, people who understand horses, who have patience. I think you'd be good at it." Jake hadn't expected this. "I don't know anything about therapy." "You don't need to. You just need to be present. Help people connect with the horses. Be a steady hand." Ruth paused. "And it would give you a reason to be here. With Ghost. If you're staying in town, might as well make yourself useful." It made sense. Jake had nowhere else to be, nothing else calling him. And the idea of being here with Ghost, of having a purpose beyond his own needs, appealed to something deep inside him. "When's the next session?" "Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll be here." After Ruth left, Jake spent the morning with Ghost. He groomed her with brushes he borrowed from the tack room, his hands remembering the familiar motions. He checked her hooves, examined her legs, looking for signs of injury or illness. She was 26 years old, but she stood strong, her eyes bright, her movements fluid. "You've been taking care of yourself," Jake murmured as he worked. "Taking care of others too, from what Ruth says. That's my girl. Always had the biggest heart. Tom Whitaker found him there around noon." Jake heard footsteps and looked up to find his old friend standing on the other side of the fence, older but still recognizable. Same easy smile, same sharp eyes, though his hair had gone grey at the temples. "Claire said I'd find you here," Tom said. "Said something about you finding a ghost." Jake straightened, suddenly awkward. "Tom, it's been a long time. 16 years. Tom's expression was unreadable. "Heard your eulogy yesterday. Wasn't sure I believed it when you said you were staying." "I am. Because of this horse?" "Partly. Mostly." Jake gestured to Ghost. "You remember her. You were there when I found her. Helped me set that leg." Tom's eyes widened. He climbed through the fence and approached Ghost carefully. She allowed it, standing still as Tom examined her. He checked her teeth, her legs, running his hands over her body with professional thoroughness. "I'll be damned," he finally said. "It is her. That scar on her shoulder, the way her right front hoof curves just slightly. I remember thinking she'd never walk right again, and here she is, sound as a dollar." He looked at Jake. "Where's she been?" Jake told him everything. The records, the theft, the pregnancies, the years of being passed from owner to owner. Tom listened, his expression darkening. "Reed was a piece of work," Tom said when Jake finished. "Pulled that stunt with a few horses around here before folks got wise to him. Disappeared about 15 years ago. Heard he got caught somewhere down in Nevada. Finally faced some consequences. Good, Jake thought. Not enough, but something. So the colt," Tom said, "you know where it ended up?" "Wyoming. Sold to a ranch, that's all the records say." Tom pulled out his phone. "Give me the name of the ranch. I still have contacts from vet school. Someone might know something." Jake found the name in the photos he'd taken of Ghost's records. Tom made a few calls while Jake continued grooming Ghost. When Tom hung up from the third call, he was grinning. "Found him. Well, found his descendants. The colt lived to be 18, sired about 40 foals before he died. One of his sons is still on the original ranch. 10-year-old gelding named Phantom. Owner's name is Bill Jessup." Jake's heart rate kicked up. Ghost's grandson. A living piece of the family line he hadn't known existed. "Can I call him?" "Already did. Explain the situation. He's willing to talk to you." Tom handed Jake the phone number. Jake stared at it, possibilities spinning through his mind. Ghost's grandson. Another chance to make things right. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and planning. Jake called his landlord in Denver, arranged to break his lease, called his boss, gave notice. The man barely seemed surprised. "Figured you'd been heading somewhere else in your head for a while now," he said, not unkindly. Jake called Bill Jessup from the ranch that evening, with Claire listening in. The rancher was in his 70s, his voice gravelly but warm. "Ghost's colt was one of the best horses I ever owned," Bill said. "Sad day when we lost him. Kick from another stallion got infected, nothing we could do, but he left us good stock. Phantom's his spitting image, same white coat, same spirit." "Would you consider selling him?" Jake asked, though his bank account was nearly empty and he had no idea how he'd pay. Bill was quiet for a long moment. "That horse is worth 20,000 easy. But let me ask you something. Why do you want him?" Jake could have lied. Could have said it was about the bloodline, about having a good horse. Instead, he told the truth. "I owe Ghost 21 years, he said. 21 years of searching I gave up on. 21 years of her waiting for me while I built a life that didn't mean anything. I can't give her back what she lost, but maybe I can bring her family home. Maybe that's a start." Another long silence. Then Bill said, "Tell you what, you come up here, meet Phantom, spend some time with him. If he likes you and Ghost is really his grandmother, we'll work something out. I'm not promising anything, but I'm not saying no either." It was more than Jake had hoped for. He thanked Bill and hung up, then sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "You can't afford a $20,000 horse," Claire said gently. "I know. And even if you could, where would you keep him?" "Here. He'd stay here, help with the therapeutic riding program. Ruth already said they need more horses." Jake looked up at his sister. I know it's crazy. I know I'm probably chasing something impossible. But Claire, when I saw Ghost yesterday, for the first time in 16 years, I felt something. Purpose, connection, like maybe I'm not just drifting anymore. Claire sat down across from him. The ranch is struggling, Jake. We're barely keeping our heads above water. I can't help you buy a horse. I'm not asking you to. I'll figure something out. How? Jake didn't have an answer. The next afternoon, Jake showed up at the fairgrounds at 1:30, nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. Ruth introduced him to the other volunteers, older folks who'd been with the program for years, and explained the basics. Be patient, be present. Let the horses do most of the work. The veterans started arriving at 2, 8 of them, ranging from their late 20s to early 60s. Some wore their service visible in their bearing, others carried it deeper, in eyes that had seen too much. One man caught Jake's attention immediately, mid-50s, average height, with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to trust the world. He walked with a slight limp, and his eyes swept the fairgrounds constantly, cataloguing exits and threats. Ruth made introductions. Marcus Webb, this is Jake Thornton. He's new to the program, but he's been around horses his whole life. Jake, Marcus is one of our regulars. Been coming for about 8 months now. Marcus shook Jake's hand. His grip was firm, his palms calloused. Army? No. Construction. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, not disappointment, but a recalibration. Claire's brother. You know Claire? Everyone knows Claire. She donated hay to the program last winter when we were running short. Marcus looked past Jake to where Ghost stood in her paddock. That's my horse, Blanca. We work together every week. Of course, Ruth had mentioned Ghost worked with the veterans. Jake should have realized Marcus would be one of them. She's a good horse, Jake said carefully. The best. Marcus started toward the paddock, and Jake followed. When Ghost saw Marcus, she nickered and moved to the fence. The greeting was warm, but when her eyes found Jake, something changed. She left Marcus and came to Jake instead, pressing her head against his chest. Marcus stopped, watching. Well, that's new. Sorry, I used to know her a long time ago. How long? 21 years. Marcus studied Jake with new interest. You're the one. Ruth told me about you, the cowboy who saved her. I didn't save her. She saved me. Something in Marcus's face softened. Yeah, I know how that works. They saddled Ghost together, Marcus showing Jake the routine, the specific way Ghost liked her girth tightened, the spot behind her ears she loved scratched. Jake remembered all of it, his hands moving through familiar motions while Marcus narrated. She came to me on my first day, Marcus said as they worked. I didn't want to be here. My daughter made me come, said I needed to try something besides the VA doctors and their pills. I was angry, ready to leave. Then Blanca walked up to me and just stood there, like she knew. Knew what? That I was barely holding on. Marcus's voice was quiet. Lost my whole unit in Afghanistan. IED took out the vehicle ahead of mine. If we'd been 30 seconds faster, it would have been us instead. For years, I couldn't figure out why I survived, couldn't carry the weight of being the one who made it home. Jake waited, understanding that silence was what Marcus needed. Blanca helped me realize survival isn't something to feel guilty about. It's something to honor, by living, by being present, by showing up. Marcus ran his hand along Ghost's neck. She's been waiting for you, you know. I could never figure out what it was, but she always seemed like she was looking for something, someone. I'm here now, Jake said. I'm not leaving again. Marcus nodded. Good. She deserves that. The session began with Marcus riding Ghost around the arena while Jake walked beside them. Ruth had explained that the volunteers were there for safety, for encouragement, for connection. Jake watched Marcus relax into the saddle, watched Ghost adjust her gait to match his balance, and understood what Ruth had meant about the horses doing the work. After Marcus, Jake helped other veterans, a young woman who'd lost her arm in Iraq and was learning to ride one-handed, an older man whose PTSD made large groups unbearable, but who found peace with horses. Each one had a story. Each one had come seeking something the human world couldn't provide. By the end of the session, Jake was exhausted and exhilarated. This was work that mattered. These were people who needed what he and Ghost could offer. Marcus found him as everyone was leaving. "You coming back?" "Every session." "Good." Marcus hesitated. "Look, I know it's not my place, but Ruth mentioned something about you trying to find Blanca's colt, or the colt's offspring. Her grandson. He's in Wyoming. And I don't have $20,000 to buy him." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. "I run a veteran support group, meets Thursday nights at the VFW. You should come. Tell them about Blanca, about her grandson, about what this program means. You might be surprised." Jake took the card, doubtful but grateful. "Thanks. I'll think about it. Do more than think. These are people who understand about second chances, about bringing pieces of yourself back home." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. 7 o'clock, Thursday. Over the next few days, Jake fell into a routine. Mornings at the fairgrounds with Ghost. Afternoons working the ranch with Claire. Evenings planning, researching, trying to figure out the impossible math of buying a horse he couldn't afford. Tom came by Wednesday evening with news. He'd called in favors, tracked down veterinary records, confirmed that Phantom was indeed Ghost's grandson. More than that, he'd found photos. Tom pulled them up on his phone and passed it to Jake. The horse was stunning, pure white coat, elegant build, strong legs. And there, on his left shoulder, barely visible in the image, was a crescent-shaped mark. Not a scar, but a birthmark. The same shape as Ghost's scar. "It's genetic," Tom explained. "Passed down through the line. Phantom carries his grandmother's mark." Jake stared at the photo, emotion thick in his throat. Ghost's grandson, carrying her mark, waiting in Wyoming. "I have to bring him home," Jake said. "I know. But Jake, even if you could afford him, there's another problem." Tom pulled up something on his phone. "The fairgrounds lease. Ruth's been fighting with the county for months. There's a developer who wants the land. If they don't renew her lease, the program shuts down. All the horses, including Ghost, will need new homes." Jake's stomach dropped. "When?" "Decisions in 6 weeks. Ruth's trying to raise money, prove the program's value, but it's an uphill battle. 6 weeks. Not enough time to save Phantom, possibly not enough time to secure Ghost's future either." "Then we need to move faster," Jake said. "Make people care. Show them what this program means." "How?" Jake thought about Marcus's invitation, about the veterans who came every week seeking healing, about Ghost who'd spent 15 years offering it freely. "I have an idea," he said. Thursday night, Jake walked into the VFW hall with sweating palms and a story he wasn't sure anyone would care about. The room was arranged with chairs in a circle, about 20 people already seated. Marcus waved him over. "Everyone, this is Jake Thornton, Claire's brother. He's been helping with the riding program." Marcus gestured to an empty chair. "Jake's got something to share with us." Jake sat, feeling the weight of expectant eyes. These were people who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd earned the right to judge whether his problems mattered. He almost stood up and left. Then he thought about Ghost, waiting at the fairgrounds, and found his voice. 21 years ago, I found a white horse dying in a ravine," he began, and then he told them everything. The rescue, the bond, the disappearance, the 16 years he'd spent running from a loss he didn't know how to carry, finding Ghost again, learning she'd been stolen, sold, separated from her foal, learning about the therapeutic riding program and the way Ghost had spent 15 years healing others. The room was silent when he finished. "A grandson is in Wyoming," Jake continued. "A horse named Phantom. I want to bring him home, partly for Ghost, to give her back some of what was taken, but also for the program. Ruth needs more horses, needs funding, needs the community to recognize what she's built. I think Phantom could be part of that." "How much?" someone asked. 20,000, plus transport." A low whistle. Someone else said, "That's steep, I know, and I don't have it, but I thought." Jake paused, gathering courage. "Marcus said you all understand about second chances, about bringing pieces of yourself home. This program gave that to Ghost, to Marcus, maybe to others here. I'm asking if you'd consider helping me give something back." Marcus stood. I'll put in 500. It's not much, but it's what I've got. A woman across the circle said, 300 from me, then someone else, and someone else. Small amounts, mostly 50 here, 100 there, but they added up. By the end of the meeting, the veterans had pledged $4,000. Jake sat stunned, humbled by the generosity of people he barely knew. It's a start, Marcus said after everyone had left, but you need more, a lot more. I know. What's your plan? Jake had been thinking about this for days. A fundraiser, big one. Get the whole town involved. Show people what the therapeutic program does. Tell Ghost's story. Make them care. When? 2 weeks. That gives us time to organize, but doesn't wait so long we lose momentum. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll help. So will the others. But Jake, you need to understand something. If this fails, if you can't raise the money or the fairgrounds loses its lease, Ghost might end up needing a new home anyway. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Jake said without hesitation. If it comes to that, she comes to our ranch. I'll make room. I'll figure it out. Even if it means taking on more debt, your ranch is already struggling, even then. I told Ghost I wasn't leaving again. I meant it. Marcus smiled. Okay then, let's make this happen. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Jake and Claire worked with Ruth to plan the fundraiser. The VFW veterans formed committees. Tom handled the veterinary logistics. Claire reached out to local businesses for donations and auction items. The story spread through Ironwood like wildfire. The local newspaper ran a feature about Ghost, about Jake's return, about the therapeutic riding program. The headline read, After 21 years, Cowboy and Horse reunited. Now he's fighting to bring her grandson home. Donations started trickling in, $20 here, $50 there. A local church took up a collection. The high school held a car wash. Every contribution brought them closer to their goal, but they were still far short. Jake spent every free moment with Ghost. They fell back into old rhythms as if the 21 years had never happened. He'd talk to her while grooming her, telling her about Phantom, about the plan, about the life they'd build together. I saw his picture, Jake said one evening as the sun set over the fairgrounds. He's beautiful, Ghost. Looks just like you did when I first found you. Same white coat, same strength. He even has a mark on his shoulder, same spot as your scar, like he's carrying a piece of you. Ghost leaned into him, her breathing slow and steady. We're going to bring him home, Jake promised. Somehow we're going to make this work. On the Thursday before the fundraiser, Claire sat Jake down in the ranch kitchen. She looked tired, older than her 52 years, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy. I need to tell you something. About the ranch. Jake waited. We're in debt. Serious debt. Dad took out loans to keep things running after Mom died. Then the market shifted. Beef prices dropped, and he kept borrowing. I've been trying to dig us out for years, but... She spread her hands. We're looking at foreclosure if I can't restructure the debt. Soon. Jake's world tilted. Why didn't you tell me? Pride. Stubbornness. The same reason Dad didn't tell you, the same reason you didn't tell us you were miserable in Denver. Claire's eyes were wet. We're not good at asking for help, our family. What do you need? A miracle, or a solid business plan that shows the bank we're viable long-term. Claire pulled out a folder. I've been working on this, a plan to partner with the therapeutic riding program, use our land, our facilities, bring in steady income and serve the community. But it only works if the fairgrounds lease gets renewed and they have enough horses to expand. Jake saw it then, how everything was connected. Saving Phantom meant saving the program. Saving the program meant saving the ranch. Saving the ranch meant saving the life Claire had built, the legacy their father had left. The fundraiser isn't just about Ghost, he said slowly. No, it's about all of us, about proving that sometimes the things that seem impractical or sentimental are actually the most practical things of all, about showing the bank and the county that there's value in healing, in second chances, in bringing broken things back together. Jake reached across the table and took his sister's hand. We'll make it work. You don't know that. No, but I believe it, and I haven't believed in anything for 16 years. That has to count for something. Claire squeezed his hand, managed to smile. Yeah, it does. The morning of the fundraiser, Jake woke before dawn with his stomach in knots. Today would determine everything. The future of the therapeutic program, the ranch's financial salvation, Ghost's grandson, and maybe Jake's own redemption. No pressure. He drove to the fairgrounds in the pre-dawn darkness. Ruth was already there, setting up tables and chairs, her movements efficient despite the early hour. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked when she saw him. "Too much riding on today. We've done everything we could. Advertised, reached out, made our case. Now we see if people care." They worked together in comfortable silence, transforming the fairgrounds into an event space. By 7, other volunteers had arrived. By 8, vendors were setting up booths. By 9, the smell of barbecue filled the air and a local band was doing sound checks. Claire arrived with boxes of her father's belongings for the auction. Jake helped her unload, noticing items he recognized from childhood. Samuel's collection of antique tools, his rodeo belt buckles, a hand-carved saddle stand that had belonged to Jake's grandfather. "You sure about this?" Jake asked, holding the saddle stand. "Dad would want it to matter," Claire said. "Would want his things to serve a purpose, not just gather dust." Marcus and the other veterans arrived at 10, wearing matching T-shirts that read Ghost's Legacy with a silhouette of a white horse. They'd had them made at their own expense, planned to sell them to raise additional funds. "Sharp," Jake said, and Marcus grinned. "We clean up nice when we need to." Tom showed up with his clinic's mobile unit, offering free basic vet checks for people's horses, all proceeds going to the fund. The local feed store donated a year's worth of hay. The diner provided food at cost. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw the community he'd left behind coming together. By 11, when the event officially opened, the parking lot was already half full. People came. God, did they come! Families with children, older couples, veterans from 3 counties over, news crews from 2 different stations. By noon, the fairgrounds were packed with more people than Jake had seen in one place since the 4th of July celebrations of his youth. He stood near Ghost's paddock, watching it all with something like awe. Ruth found him there, her eyes bright with tears. "Look at this," she said. "Look at what you started." "I didn't start it. Ghost did. 21 years ago when she refused to give up." The day unfolded in a cascade of moments Jake knew he'd remember forever. A little girl with cerebral palsy taking her first ride on Ghost, her face transformed with joy. An elderly veteran breaking down in tears after Marcus shared how the program had saved his life. Claire bidding on their father's saddle stand and winning it, planning to donate it back to the program. Jake gave interviews, told Ghost's story again and again, each time finding new words to express what she meant, not just to him but to everyone she'd touched over the years. The auction in the afternoon brought in thousands. Items that shouldn't have been worth much went for ridiculous amounts because people weren't bidding on things. They were bidding on hope, on connection, on the idea that broken things could be made whole. By 4 o'clock, Ruth pulled Jake aside. "We're at 18,000. So close, but not enough. We've still got the evening session," Jake said. "The barbecue dinner, the riding demonstrations." "I know. I'm trying to manage expectations." Jake understood. She'd fought for this program for 15 years, had watched it transform lives, and now its future hung by a thread. The evening brought a different energy. The crowd settled into a more reflective mood as the sun began its descent. The band played slower songs. Families spread blankets on the grass. And then it was time for the riding demonstrations. Marcus led them off, riding Ghost around the arena with a confidence he said he'd lost in Afghanistan and found again in this paddock. Other veterans followed, each one sharing briefly what the program meant before taking their ride. The audience watched in reverent silence. This wasn't entertainment. This was testimony. This was proof that healing was possible, that coming home wasn't always about geography but about finding places and people and creatures who understood. Finally, it was Jake's turn. He hadn't planned to ride, but Ruth insisted. "People need to see you with her," she'd said. "Need to see what 21 years of love looks like." Jake led Ghost to the center of the arena. No saddle, just a bridle, the way they'd ridden in the old days when it was just the 2 of them in the Montana wilderness. He mounted, and Ghost stood steady beneath him. For a moment, they were both still. Then Jake leaned forward and whispered, "Let's show them, girl." Ghost moved into a walk, then a trot, then a canter, smooth and powerful exactly as Jake remembered. They circled the arena once, twice, and Jake felt the years fall away. He wasn't 50 anymore. He wasn't broken by life or worn down by disappointment. He was 28 again, riding a white horse who'd trusted him to save her and had returned that trust 1,000-fold. They came to a stop in the center of the arena, and Jake slid off, pressing his forehead to Ghost's. The crowd erupted in applause, but Jake barely heard it. All he heard was Ghost's breathing, steady and sure, and his own heart beating in time with hers. Ruth met him at the gate, tears streaming down her face. "That was perfect," she said. "Just perfect." As sunset painted the sky orange and pink, Ruth took the microphone for the final tally. The crowd gathered close, and Jake found himself holding his breath. "Today has been extraordinary," Ruth began. "You've all shown what community means, what caring for each other looks like. Thanks to your generosity, we've raised—" She paused, consulting her notes. $22,400. The crowd roared. Jake felt his knees go weak. They'd done it, more than done it. They'd exceeded the goal. But Ruth wasn't finished. "However, there's something you all need to know. The fairgrounds lease situation. The county is meeting Monday to vote on renewal. There's significant pressure from a developer to deny it. We need you to show up. We need you to speak. We need you to fight for this program the way you fought for it today." The mood shifted, celebration tempered by new worry. People started calling out questions, promises, commitments. A woman Jake vaguely recognized from high school stood up. "I'm on the County Planning Commission," she said. "I can tell you that vote is going to be close. 3-2, might go either way. What you did today matters. But Monday matters more." Jake found Marcus in the crowd. "We're not done, are we?" "Never are," Marcus said. "But hey, we've got the money for Phantom. That's something." It was everything. But it was also just the beginning. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctant to let the day end. Jake stayed at the fairgrounds long after everyone left, sitting in Ghost's paddock while she dozed nearby. Claire found him there around 10, carrying 2 beers and a tired smile. "Figured you'd still be here," she said, handing him a bottle. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, Claire spoke. "I went to see the bank yesterday. Showed them the fundraiser plans, the partnership proposal. They're willing to listen, but they want to see the lease renewed first. No program, no partnership, no restructured debt. Everything depends on Monday. Everything." Claire took a long drink. "Jake, if this doesn't work, if we lose the ranch, we won't. But if we do, I need you to know it's not your fault. You came home, you tried. That's more than I had any right to expect after 16 years." Jake turned to look at his sister, really look at her. She'd carried the weight of the ranch alone, had never complained, had never asked him for help because she knew he'd been carrying his own weight and barely managing that. "I should have come back sooner," he said. "Should have called more, checked in, been here. We all should have done a lot of things, but we did what we could with what we had." Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you're here now. Whatever happens." "Me too." Sunday passed in a blur of preparation. Jake, Marcus, Ruth, and a dozen others worked on statements for the county meeting. Tom gathered letters from veterans and their families testifying to the program's impact. Claire pulled together financial projections, showing how the partnership would work. That evening, Jake called Bill Jessup in Wyoming. "We got the money," Jake said without preamble. 22,000. I can be there by Wednesday to pick up Phantom." Bill was quiet for a long moment. "Well, I'll be damned. You actually did it. Had a lot of help. Still, that's something." Another pause. "Thing is, Jake, I've been thinking. I did some research on you and Claire, on the therapeutic riding program. Saw the news coverage. Heard what you're trying to build." Jake's stomach tightened. And I think Phantom belongs with Ghost. With you. So here's what I'm thinking. You take that 22,000 and put it toward your ranch and the program. I'll give you Phantom for 5,000 and a promise." "What promise?" That you'll send me updates. Photos, videos, whatever. Let me see him with his grandmother. Let me see what kind of life he builds there. That's all I want." Jake couldn't speak for a moment. "Bill, I can't. That's too generous. It's not generous. It's right. That horse came from Ghost's bloodline. He should go back to it. Besides, I'm 76 years old, got more money than I need and not enough time to spend it. Let me do this. Let me be part of whatever you're building." Jake's throat was tight. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say except thank you. Don't thank me yet. First, you've got to get that lease renewed. Then we'll talk logistics." After they hung up, Jake sat in the ranch kitchen staring at his phone. $17,000. That would go so far toward saving the ranch, toward building the partnership, toward making everything work. Bill Jessup, a man he'd never met, had just handed him a lifeline. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Jake dressed carefully, wearing his father's old blazer that he'd found in the back of the closet. It smelled like Samuel, like leather and hay and Old Spice. The county building was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled, people lining the walls, spilling out into the hallway. Jake recognized faces from the fundraiser, veterans wearing their Ghost's legacy shirts, parents with children who'd benefited from the program. Ruth sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. The developer spoke first, tall, polished, wearing an expensive suit. He talked about economic growth, about tax revenue, about the shopping complex he wanted to build. His numbers were impressive, his arguments logical. Then Ruth spoke. She talked about healing, about service, about the 30 veterans who'd found purpose again through the program. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. Marcus went next. He talked about the IED that killed his unit, about the years he'd spent drowning in survivor's guilt, about the white horse named Blanca who'd taught him that surviving was a gift, not a curse. One by one, others stood. A mother whose son had come home from Iraq with PTSD and found peace in the paddock. A Vietnam veteran who'd waited 50 years to talk about his war and finally found the words while grooming a horse. A young woman whose service dog had been trained at the fairgrounds stables. Jake was the last to speak. He approached the microphone with his heart pounding. "I left Ironwood 16 years ago," he began. "Left because I thought home was a place I'd outgrown. Thought I was moving towards something better. I was wrong. I spent 16 years drifting, working jobs that didn't matter, living in apartments that never felt like home. Then my father died, and I came back for the funeral, and I found something I'd lost 21 years ago. A white horse named Ghost who'd been stolen from me, who'd spent those years being passed from owner to owner, looking for home. She ended up at the Fairgrounds therapeutic riding program, and that's where I found her. Or she found me." Jake paused, gathering himself. "This isn't just about a horse. It's about what we choose to value. Do we value quick profits and shopping complexes? Or do we value healing, purpose, second chances? The developer is right that his plan would bring in money, but I'm asking you to consider what we'd be losing, not just a riding program, but a place where broken things can be made whole, where veterans can find peace, where a cowboy and a horse can come home after 21 years and still recognize each other." He looked directly at the commissioners. "I'm asking you to choose the harder thing, the less immediately profitable thing, the thing that matters." Jake sat down, his hands shaking. Claire reached over and squeezed his knee. The commissioners deliberated, for 45 minutes that felt like 45 years. When they returned, the chairman looked tired. "This was not an easy decision," he said. "Both proposals have merit. But after considerable discussion, we've decided that the therapeutic riding program represents the kind of investment in human well-being that this county should prioritize." The lease is renewed for 10 years. The gallery erupted, people cheering, crying, hugging. Jake felt Claire grab him, felt Ruth's hands on his shoulders, felt Marcus's strong grip on his arm. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd done it. Outside on the courthouse steps, Ruth was surrounded by reporters. Jake slipped away, needing air, needing space to process what had just happened. He found a quiet spot around the corner and called Bill Jessup. "We got it," Jake said when Bill answered. "The lease renewed." "Hot damn. Guess I'll be seeing you Wednesday then." "Wednesday," Jake confirmed. "And Bill, thank you for everything. Just send me those photos, son. That's all the thanks I need." Jake drove straight to the fairgrounds. Ghost was in her paddock, and when she saw him, she moved to the fence. He climbed through and wrapped his arms around her neck. "We did it, girl," he whispered. "We're bringing him home. We're bringing Phantom home." That night, Claire spread the bank paperwork across the kitchen table. With the lease secured and $17,000 from the adjusted Phantom purchase, they had what they needed to restructure the ranch's debt. "The partnership agreement gives us steady income," Claire explained, tracing numbers on the projection sheets. "The therapeutic program pays to use our facilities and pastures. We provide hay, maintenance, boarding for their horses. It's symbiotic." "When do we need to present this to the bank?" "Tomorrow. They're expecting us." Jake studied the numbers, seeing not just figures but futures. His, Claire's, Ghost's, the veterans who'd come seeking healing. All of it connected, all of it depending on the choices they made now. "What if it's not enough?" he asked. "What if they say no?" Claire met his eyes. "Then we lose the ranch. But Jake, we'd lose it together, and that's worth something." The next morning, they sat across from a banker named Margaret Chen who'd known their father. She reviewed their proposal with careful attention, asking questions, making notes, her expression neutral. Finally, she set down her pen. "Your father came to see me 6 months before he died, asked about restructuring the debt. I had to tell him that without significant changes, the ranch wasn't viable long-term." Jake's chest tightened. His father had known, had been fighting this battle alone. "He said something that stayed with me," Margaret continued. "He said the ranch wasn't just land and cattle, it was legacy, it was family, it was proof that some things endure." She tapped the proposal. "This plan honors that. Shows me you're not just trying to hold on to the past, but building toward a future. I'm approving the restructuring." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You've got work ahead of you, but I believe you can do it." Margaret smiled. "Your father would be proud." Outside the bank, Jake and Claire stood on the sidewalk, letting reality settle over them. They'd saved the ranch, saved the program. Now they just needed to bring Phantom home. Wednesday morning, Jake hitched the ranch's horse trailer to his truck. Tom had checked it over, declared it sound for the trip. Marcus handed Jake a thermos of coffee and a bag of sandwiches. "For the road," Marcus said. "And Jake? Drive safe. We're all waiting to meet him." The drive to Wyoming took 8 hours. Jake spent them thinking about everything that had led to this moment, finding Ghost in the ravine, nursing her back to health, losing her, leaving Ironwood, 16 years of drifting, finding her again, the fundraiser, the county vote. All of it had been leading here, to this highway, this journey, this act of bringing Ghost's family home. Bill Jessup's ranch was beautiful, rolling hills and well-maintained fences. The man himself was waiting by the barn, tall and lean with weathered skin and kind eyes. "Jake Thornton," Bill said, extending his hand. "Been looking forward to meeting the man who wouldn't give up." "I did give up, for a long time. But you came back. That's what matters." Bill led Jake to a paddock where a white horse stood watching them. Phantom, even more beautiful in person than in photos. Strong, graceful, with that distinctive crescent-shaped mark on his left shoulder. "He's been ready since yesterday," Bill said, like he knew something was happening. Jake approached slowly. Phantom's ears flicked forward, curious but calm. When Jake reached the fence, the horse came to him, sniffing his hand, his jacket. Searching. "Hey there, Phantom," Jake said softly. "I'm going to tell you a story about a white mare named Ghost who survived impossible things. She's your grandmother, and she's been waiting for you." Phantom pressed his nose against Jake's chest, right over his heart. The same gesture Ghost always made, the same trust offered freely. "He likes you," Bill observed. "It's genetic," Jake said, his voice thick. They loaded Phantom into the trailer with surprising ease. The horse walked in calmly, as if he'd been expecting this. Bill handed Jake the registration papers and a thick envelope. "Photos," Bill explained, of Phantom growing up, of his father. Thought Ghost might want to see them. Jake didn't know what to say. This man, this stranger, had given him so much. "The 5,000, Jake began, pulling out his checkbook. "Mail it when you get home. I trust you." Bill extended his hand. "Take care of him. Take care of her. And send me those updates. Every week, I promise." The drive back was slower, Jake conscious of the precious cargo behind him. He stopped every 2 hours to check on Phantom, to offer water, to reassure. Each time the horse was calm, patient, as if he understood the journey's importance. Jake called Claire from the last rest stop. "We're an hour out." "Everyone's here," Claire said. "Ruth, Marcus, Tom, half the town, they're all waiting. Tell Ghost I'm bringing him home. She knows. I swear she knows." The sun was setting when Jake pulled into the fairgrounds. The parking lot was full, people gathered along the fence, a hush falling as his truck appeared. He parked near Ghost's paddock and climbed out on shaking legs. Ruth approached, her eyes bright. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." They unloaded Phantom together. The horse emerged from the trailer, head high, taking in his new surroundings. The crowd watched in reverent silence. Then Ghost saw him. She'd been standing at the far end of her paddock, but when Phantom appeared, she went still. For a long moment, grandmother and grandson simply looked at each other across 30 yards of ground. Then Ghost began to move, not running but walking with purpose, exactly as she'd walked toward Jake that first day. Phantom's ears swiveled toward her, his entire body tensing with recognition he couldn't possibly understand, but felt in his bones. Jake led Phantom to the paddock gate. "This is Ghost," he said quietly. "This is home." He opened the gate. Phantom walked through. The two white horses met in the center of the paddock. They circled each other once, sniffing, assessing. Then Ghost did something that made Jake's vision blur with tears. She pressed her forehead against Phantom's neck, a gesture of welcome and acceptance and love that transcended human understanding. Phantom leaned into her, and they stood that way for a long time, two pieces of a family finally made whole. The crowd erupted in applause and tears, but Jake barely heard them. He was watching Ghost, watching the way she stood with her grandson, the tension she'd carried for 21 years finally releasing. Marcus appeared at Jake's elbow. "You did it, we did it, all of us. What happens now?" Jake watched Ghost and Phantom, watched the way they'd already begun to move in sync, as if they'd known each other forever. "Now we build the life they deserve," Jake said. "We keep the program running. We help people heal. We honor what they've taught us about coming home." "Sounds like a plan." As the crowd dispersed and night fell, Jake remained at the fence. Claire joined him, then Tom, then Ruth, then Marcus. They stood together, watching the two white horses in the moonlight, not needing words to express what they were feeling. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Dad would have loved this." "Yeah," Jake said, "he would have." They stood there until the stars came out, a family reunited not just by blood, but by purpose, by love, by the understanding that some bonds endure no matter how much time passes or how far we wander. 2 weeks after Phantom's arrival, Jake was sorting through Ghost's old medical records when he found something he'd missed before. A veterinary invoice from 20 years ago, tucked between transfer documents. The bill was for prenatal care and foaling assistance, dated 3 months after Ghost had disappeared. But it was the notation at the bottom that made Jake's heart stop. Twin foals delivered, 1 colt sold, 1 filly retained for breeding, twins. Jake read it again, certain he'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. Ghost had given birth to twins, a colt and a filly. They'd sold the colt, the one who became Phantom's father. But they'd kept the filly. Jake's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and called Tom. "I need you to look at something," Jake said without preamble. "Now." Tom arrived 20 minutes later. Jake showed him the invoice, watched his friend's eyes widen. "Twins," Tom breathed. "That's rare in horses. Maybe 1 in 10,000 pregnancies. The filly. Where is she? What happened to her?" They dug through the records together, following a paper trail that grew colder with each passing year. The filly had been kept by Dalton Reed for breeding. She'd produced several foals before being sold when Reed's operation collapsed. After that, the trail went dead. "Could be anywhere," Tom said. "Could be dead. 20 years is a long time." But Jake couldn't let it go. Ghost's daughter. A mare who'd be 21 years old now, if she was still alive. Phantom's aunt. Another piece of Ghost's family, lost somewhere out there. He called Bill Jessup that evening. The old rancher listened as Jake explained what he'd found. A twin sister, Bill said thoughtfully, never knew about that. Reed kept that quiet. Any idea where she might have gone? Reed sold off his stock when he got arrested. Auctioned down in Nevada, if I remember right. But Jake, that was 15 years ago. Tracking her now would be like finding a needle in a haystack. I have to try. Why? You've got Ghost, you've got Phantom, you've built something good. Why risk it on another wild goose chase? Jake looked out the window at the barn, where Ghost and Phantom were settling in for the night. Because Ghost deserves to know her daughter's okay. Because family matters. Because I gave up searching for Ghost once, and it cost us both 21 years. I won't make that mistake again. Bill was quiet for a long moment. All right then, I'll make some calls, no promises, but I'll see what I can find. Over the next week, Jake threw himself into the search. He contacted auction houses, breed registries, veterinarians across 3 states. Most leads went nowhere. The few that showed promise fizzled out. Claire watched his obsession with growing concern. Jake, you're going to burn yourself out. We've got the ranch to run, the partnership to manage. You can't chase ghosts. I'm not chasing ghosts. I'm trying to find Ghost's daughter. And what if you can't? What if she's dead? What if she's somewhere happy and doesn't need to be found? Claire's voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes we have to accept that we can't fix everything. But Jake couldn't accept it. Not yet. Marcus noticed the change in him during therapy sessions. Jake was distracted, going through the motions but not fully present. After one session, Marcus pulled him aside. "What's going on with you?" Jake told him about the twin, about the missing filly, about the search that was consuming him. Marcus listened, then said, "You know what I learned in therapy? Sometimes the need to fix the past is really about trying to fix ourselves. You saved Ghost. You brought Phantom home. Maybe that has to be enough. What if it isn't? Then you'll drive yourself crazy trying to do the impossible." Marcus's voice was kind but honest. "Ghost is happy. Phantom is thriving. The program is growing. Don't lose what you have chasing what you might never find." That night, Jake sat in Ghost's stall while she dozed. He ran his hands over her white coat, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. "I found out you had a daughter," he said quietly. "A twin. She was born the same night as Phantom's father. They took her from you, kept her for breeding. I don't know where she is now, but I'm trying to find her. I know it might be impossible. I know people think I'm obsessing. But Ghost, I need you to know that I'm not giving up. Not this time." Ghost turned her head to look at him, her dark eyes calm and knowing. She pressed her nose against his shoulder, and Jake felt something shift inside him. Not permission or encouragement, but understanding. Ghost had survived 21 years of loss and uncertainty. She'd made peace with what she couldn't change, while still hoping for what might be possible. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe healing wasn't about fixing everything. Maybe it was about showing up, staying present, and accepting that some questions don't have answers. The call came 3 days later. Bill Jessup, his voice excited. "Found something, maybe. There's a mare at a rescue operation in Idaho. Right age, right breeding. They've had her for 5 years. Pulled her from a neglect situation. Her name is Silver, but that doesn't mean anything. Owners change names all the time. Can you send me information?" "Already did. Check your email." Jake opened the attachment with trembling hands. Photos of a white mare, older but strong. And there, on her left shoulder, barely visible through her coat, was a crescent-shaped mark. The same mark Phantom had. The same mark that traced back to Ghost's scar. "It's her," Jake breathed. "It has to be." He called the rescue immediately. A woman named Patricia answered, her voice warm but cautious, when Jake explained why he was calling. "Silver's been through a lot," Patricia said. "She's gentle, but she's wary, doesn't trust easily. We've been working with her, but she needs someone patient, someone who understands trauma." "I understand trauma," Jake said, "and I think I know someone else who might help her understand trust again." "What do you mean?" "Her mother, Ghost. She's here, at our therapeutic riding program, and Silver's nephew, Phantom. We've been trying to find her for weeks. If she's who I think she is, she has family waiting for her." Patricia was silent for a long moment. "Family? She's never had that. None of our records mention any relatives. That's because she was stolen. Her mother was stolen. They were separated when she was just days old. But we can change that, if you'll let us." Another long pause. "Come see her. If you're right, if she really is Ghost's daughter, then she deserves to know where she came from." Jake made the drive to Idaho 2 days later, Tom riding shotgun. The rescue was smaller than he'd expected, a modest facility caring for about 20 horses. Patricia met them at the gate, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Silver's in the back paddock," she said. "Fair warning, she might not approach. She's skittish with strangers." But when they reached the paddock, something extraordinary happened. Silver stood at the far fence, white coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. When she saw Jake, her head came up. She stared at him for a long moment, then began to walk forward, not cautiously, not fearfully, but with purpose, exactly the way Ghost walked. She came straight to Jake and pressed her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. The same gesture Ghost made, the same gesture Phantom had made. Genetic memory passed down through generations, a greeting that said home and family, and finally. Tom was staring. Patricia had tears in her eyes. Jake wrapped his arms around Silver's neck and whispered, "I found you. Your mother's waiting. Let's go home." The paperwork took 3 days. Patricia insisted on thoroughly vetting Jake and the therapeutic riding program before releasing Silver. She visited Ironwood personally, met Ghost and Phantom, toured the facilities, interviewed Ruth and the veterans. Only when she was satisfied that Silver would be safe and loved did she agree to the transfer. "She's been waiting for this her whole life," Patricia said as they finalized the documents. "She just didn't know what she was waiting for." Jake understood that feeling completely. The plan was to bring Silver home on Saturday, giving the program time to prepare and allowing the community to gather for what everyone was calling the reunion. News of Ghost's long-lost daughter had spread through Ironwood like wildfire. The local paper ran a feature. A news station in Billings called requesting an interview. But Jake was nervous in a way he hadn't been with Phantom. Phantom had been young, adaptable. Silver was 21, had been through trauma, had learned to be wary. What if she didn't bond with Ghost? What if the genetic connection wasn't enough to bridge 21 years of separation? "You're overthinking this," Claire said Thursday evening as they worked on the barn. They were preparing a stall for Silver, making sure everything was perfect. "Ghost will know her daughter. Horses don't forget. Ghost forgot me for 21 years. She didn't forget. She was waiting. There's a difference." Marcus stopped by that evening, ostensibly to check on preparations, but really, Jake suspected, to check on him. "You doing okay?" Marcus asked, terrified. "Of what?" Jake set down the pitchfork he'd been using to spread fresh straw. "Of getting this wrong, of building up Ghost's hopes and having it not work out, of proving that some broken things can't be fixed." Marcus leaned against the stall door. "You know what I learned working with these horses? They don't need things to be perfect. They need things to be real. Ghost doesn't need Silver to immediately recognize her or for everything to be easy. She just needs her daughter to be safe and home. That's all any parent needs." "You sound like you're speaking from experience. My daughter's in California. We didn't talk for 3 years after I came back from Afghanistan. I was too messed up, pushed everyone away. She kept trying, and I kept shutting her down." Marcus's voice was quiet. "Then I started coming here, started working with Blanca, started learning that healing isn't linear and family doesn't require perfection. We talk now. every Sunday. It's not perfect, but it's real. What changed? I stopped being afraid of failing her and started showing up, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Marcus looked at Jake. You're showing up for Ghost, for Silver, for all of us. That's what matters. Friday morning, Jake drove to Idaho to pick up Silver. Patricia had her ready, groomed and calm, though her eyes held a wariness that spoke of hard-learned survival instincts. She had a good night, Patricia said. Ate well, seemed relaxed. I think she knows something's happening. Loading Silver into the trailer was easier than Jake expected. She walked in calmly, as if she'd made a decision and was committed to seeing it through. Patricia handed Jake a folder of medical records and a worn halter. She came to us wearing this, Patricia said. It's old, probably from when she was young. I thought Ghost might want to see it. Jake examined the halter. It was simple, handmade, with initials burned into the leather. Dr. Dalton Reed, the man who'd stolen Ghost, who'd separated mother from daughter, who'd set in motion 21 years of pain. Thank you, Jake said, taking the halter, for everything, for saving her, for taking care of her. You're the one saving her, Patricia said. I just kept her alive. You're giving her life. The drive back to Montana was long. Jake stopped frequently to check on Silver, to talk to her, to reassure her. Each time she regarded him with those wary eyes, not quite trusting but not quite afraid either. Waiting, he called ahead when they were an hour out. By the time Jake pulled into the fairgrounds, a crowd had gathered. Smaller than Phantom's homecoming, more intimate. Ruth, Marcus, Tom, Claire, and about a dozen others who'd become invested in Ghost's story. Ghost and Phantom stood in their paddock, both alert, both watching the trailer with intense focus. Jake unloaded Silver carefully. She emerged from the trailer with her head high, taking in her surroundings with careful attention. The crowd watched in silence, sensing the sacred nature of what was about to happen. Then Ghost saw her. For a long moment everything was still. Mother and daughter, separated for 21 years, seeing each other for the first time since Silver was days old. There was no way Ghost could recognize her. No way she could know this was the foal taken from her 2 decades ago. But when Ghost moved, there was recognition in every line of her body. She walked to the fence, not with the curious greeting she'd given Phantom, but with something deeper, urgency, need. A mother's instinct that transcended time and logic. Silver's entire body tensed. Her ears went forward, then back, then forward again. She took one step toward Ghost, then stopped, uncertainty warring with something primal in her expression. Jake led her to the paddock gate. It's okay, he said softly. She's your mother. She's been looking for you. He opened the gate. Silver didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she walked through. Ghost met her halfway. They stopped a few feet apart, and the air between them seemed to vibrate with emotion too complex for words. They sniffed each other, circled, came back together. Ghost nickered, a sound Jake had never heard her make before. Low and mournful and full of a grief she'd carried for 21 years. Silver answered with the same sound. Then Ghost did something that made everyone watching break down. She lowered her head and pressed it against Silver's neck, a gesture of protection and love, and I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe. Silver leaned into her mother, and they stood that way for a long time, 2 white horses finally finding the connection stolen from them, before they'd had a chance to know what they were losing. Phantom approached cautiously, curious about this new horse. Silver regarded him with wariness, until Ghost stepped between them, making introductions. Then something remarkable happened. The 3 horses formed a triangle, touching nose to nose, breathing each other in, and Jake realized he was watching a family being reborn. Claire was crying, Marcus was crying, Ruth was crying. Even Tom, stoic and professional, had tears on his cheeks. Jake felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Patricia standing there. I had to see it, she explained, had to know she made it home. You drove all this way? 6 hours, worth every mile. Patricia watched the 3 horses now moving together around the paddock. 21 years I've worked rescue, seen a lot of happy endings, but I've never seen anything like this. They stood together, the whole community, watching Ghost teach Silver about this new place, watching Phantom accept his aunt with gentle curiosity, watching broken things become whole. Over the next week, Jake watched Silver's transformation. She was still wary with humans, still carried the scars of her past, but with Ghost she was different. Younger somehow, free in a way she'd never been able to be before. Ghost rarely left Silver's side. They moved together, grazed together, dozed with their bodies touching. Phantom gave them space at first, understanding in his hoarse way that something sacred was happening. Gradually, he integrated himself into their dynamic, and the three formed a herd within the larger program. Ruth approached Jake one evening as he was watching them. "Silver's been helping in the sessions, watching Ghost work with the veterans, learning by example. I think she might be ready to try participating. Already. She's only been here a week. Sometimes healing happens faster when you're where you're supposed to be," Ruth said. "Ghost knows. She's been training Silver without us even asking." Jake saw it then. The way Ghost would demonstrate calm acceptance when veterans approached. The way she'd position herself between Silver and any perceived threat, showing her daughter that these humans were safe. The way she'd nuzzle Silver after each interaction, praising her for bravery. "Let's try it," Jake said. But we go at Silver's pace. The next therapy session, they introduced Silver slowly. Marcus volunteered to work with her first, understanding the delicate balance needed. He approached her the way he'd approached Ghost a year ago. Slowly, with respect, with recognition that trauma deserves patience. Silver watched him with those wary eyes. Marcus stopped 10 feet away and simply stood, letting her decide. Ghost stood beside her daughter, calm and encouraging. After several minutes, Silver took one step toward Marcus, then another. Finally, she reached him and sniffed his hand. Marcus didn't move, didn't reach to pet her, just let her investigate. When Silver stepped back, he smiled and said, "Thank you for trusting me. It was a start." Over the next sessions, Silver gradually became more comfortable. She let veterans groom her, though she preferred Ghost nearby. She accepted a saddle, but made it clear she wasn't ready for a rider yet. Everyone respected her boundaries, understanding that healing happened on its own timeline. Jake was cleaning stalls one afternoon when Claire found him. "Bank called," she said. "The first partnership payment came through. We're current on all our loans for the first time in 3 years." Jake straightened, hope rising in his chest. "We're going to make it?" "Looks like it. Margaret said if we maintain the current trajectory, we'll be completely clear in 5 years. Claire's smile was tired but genuine. "We're going to save the ranch, Jake. The partnership is working." That night, there was a celebration at the ranch. Small, just family and close friends. Marcus, Tom, Ruth, Patricia, who decided to stay in Ironwood for a few more days. They grilled steaks and drank beer and told stories about Samuel Thornton, about Ghost, about the unlikely chain of events that had led them all here. "To second chances," Marcus said, raising his bottle. "To coming home," Claire added. "To family," Jake finished and everyone drank. Later, after everyone had left, Jake walked to the barn where Ghost, Silver and Phantom were settling in for the night. All three had been moved to the ranch permanently, a decision Ruth and Claire had made together. The therapeutic program would continue at the fairgrounds with other horses, but Ghost's family would live here. On the land Jake and his father and generations before had worked. Jake stood at the stall door, watching the 3 white horses rest together. Ghost in the center, Silver on one side, Phantom on the other. A family rebuilt against impossible odds. "We did it," Jake said softly. "I know you can't understand all of it. The money troubles, the county vote, all the human complications. But the important part, your daughter is safe, your grandson is home, you're together." Ghost opened one eye, regarding him with that calm intelligence. Then she closed it again, content. Jake returned to the house to find Claire on the porch, a box in her hands. "Found this in Dad's office," she said. "It's addressed to you." Jake took the box. Inside was a worn leather belt, the one Samuel had worn every day for as long as Jake could remember, and beneath it, A letter. Jake recognized his father's handwriting immediately. His hand shook as he unfolded the paper. "Jake, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's so much I should have said while I had the chance. I was proud of you, always. Even when you left, especially when you left, because it took courage to walk away from a life that didn't fit. I just wish I'd told you that. I wish I'd been the kind of father who could say the words instead of just working harder, trying to show you through action what I couldn't express in speech. The belt was my father's. He gave it to me when I took over the ranch. I'm giving it to you because I know somehow you'll find your way back. You'll figure out what this place means and what it needs and how to make it whole again. You were always better at seeing the big picture than I was, better at caring about things that mattered beyond profit margins and cattle counts. I'm sorry I never told you that. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but I'm not sorry you're my son. I never was. Come home, Jake, when you're ready. The ranch will be waiting. So will I, in whatever way I can be. Love, Dad." Jake couldn't see through his tears. Claire wrapped her arm around his shoulders, and they sat together on the porch where they'd grown up, holding the words their father had written but never sent. "He knew you'd come back," Claire said softly. "Yeah, I guess he did." Jake buckled his father's belt around his waist. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him all along, as if everything had been waiting. The ranch, Claire, Ghost, this moment of understanding that coming home isn't about returning to the past, but about claiming your place in the future. The next morning, Jake woke with a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd felt in years. He had work to do, a ranch to run, a partnership to maintain, a therapy program to support. He had Ghost and Silver and Phantom to care for. He had Claire to work alongside. He had a community that had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. He had, finally, a life worth living. Marcus stopped by mid-morning with news. "County is talking about expanding the therapeutic riding program. Word's gotten out about what we're doing. Other counties want to start similar programs, want to learn from our model." "That's incredible." "It is. And Jake, they're asking if you'd be willing to consult. Help other communities set up their own programs. Ruth's on board, says you have a gift for this work." Jake thought about it, about taking what they'd built here and sharing it with others, about helping more veterans, more people who needed what horses could teach about healing and trust and coming home. "Yeah," he said, "I'd like that." "Good, because I already told them you would." Marcus grinned. "Meeting's next Tuesday. Hope you can spare the time." Jake looked around the ranch, at the barn where Ghost's family dozed, at the pastures Claire maintained, at the mountains rising in the distance, eternal and grounding. This was home, finally completely home. "I can spare the time," Jake said. "I've got nothing but time now." 3 months after Silver came home, the therapeutic riding program held its annual showcase. It was a chance for the veterans to demonstrate what they'd learned, for the community to see the program's impact, and for everyone to celebrate the progress made throughout the year. The fairgrounds were decorated with banners and streamers. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Local businesses had set up booths, and in the main arena, seats filled with families and supporters eager to watch the demonstrations. Jake stood near the paddock with Ghost, Silver, and Phantom, all three groomed to perfection. Silver wore a bridle Ghost had worn years ago, one Jake had kept all these years. Phantom wore the silver bridle that had hung in the fairgrounds office, the one Jake had made for Ghost before she'd disappeared. And Ghost herself wore a new bridle, handcrafted by Jake over the past month, tooled with patterns that represented family and homecoming. Marcus approached in his showcase outfit, nervous, in a way Jake rarely saw him. "Big crowd," Marcus said. "You'll do fine. You and Ghost have done this before. Not like this. This is different." Marcus looked at the program in his hand. "I'm supposed to speak, tell my story. I don't know if I can." Jake understood. Sharing trauma was one thing in the safety of the therapy circle. Doing it in front of hundreds of people was something else entirely. "Then don't," Jake said. "Just ride. Let Ghost tell the story for you." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, okay, we can do that." The showcase began with introductions. Ruth explained the program's mission, its growth over the past year, its plans for the future. Then she invited the first rider, a young woman named Sarah who'd lost both legs in Iraq. Sarah mounted with the help of volunteers, her prosthetics visible beneath her jeans, and rode her assigned horse around the arena with confidence that would have been unimaginable a year ago. One by one, veterans demonstrated their skills. Some rode, some led horses through obstacle courses. Some simply stood with their assigned horses, showing the trust and partnership they'd built. Each one received thunderous applause. Then it was Marcus's turn. He mounted Ghost with the ease of long practice. They moved into the arena, and the crowd settled into respectful silence. Marcus rode Ghost through a series of movements, nothing fancy, just the basics: walk, trot, canter, stop. But there was something in the way they moved together that transcended technique, a partnership, a conversation between man and horse that needed no words. As they completed their circuit, Marcus brought Ghost to a stop in the center of the arena. He sat there for a moment, gathering himself. Then he began to speak. 6 years ago, I lost my entire unit in Afghanistan, he said, his voice amplified by the microphone he wore. 12 men, brothers, gone in an instant. I survived because our convoy had been delayed by 5 minutes. 5 minutes meant the difference between life and death. The crowd was utterly still. I came home broken. Couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't be around people. My daughter tried to help, but I pushed her away. I was drowning in guilt and anger and a survivor's curse that made every day feel like betrayal, like I'd stolen life from men who deserved it more. Marcus paused, running his hand along Ghost's neck. Then I came here, met this horse named Blanca. Ghost. She's 26 years old. She was stolen from her owner 21 years ago, spent years being passed from person to person, never finding home. She lost her foals, was separated from everything she loved. By all accounts, she should be angry, bitter, broken. Ghost stood calm beneath him, as if she understood every word. But she's not. She's here, helping people like me learn that survival isn't something to apologize for. That loss doesn't define us. That coming home is always possible, no matter how far we've wandered or how long we've been gone. Marcus's voice cracked. Last month we found Ghost's daughter, Silver. She'd been missing for 21 years, and 3 months before that we brought home her grandson, Phantom. This horse taught me that family isn't just the people you start with, it's the people you fight to bring back together, the bonds you refuse to let break. He looked directly at Jake, standing at the fence. A year ago, I met a man named Jake who'd been lost for 16 years, who'd left home because he couldn't carry the weight of staying. He came back for a funeral and found a white horse he'd saved 2 decades earlier, and instead of running away again, he stayed. He fought. He brought Ghost's family home. The crowd was silent, many openly crying. What I learned from Ghost and Jake is this: healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means finding purpose in what we've survived. It means showing up, even when it's hard. It means believing that broken things can be made whole if we're willing to do the work. Marcus dismounted and stood beside Ghost, his hand on her neck. So this isn't just a showcase, it's a testament to second chances, to coming home, to the belief that some bonds are stronger than time, stronger than trauma, stronger than anything that tries to break them. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. People rose to their feet, the ovation continuing for minutes. Marcus stood there, tears on his face, while Ghost simply waited beside him, patient, present, exactly as she'd always been. Jake found himself moving without thinking. He climbed through the fence and walked into the arena. The crowd quieted, curious. Jake reached Marcus and pulled him into a hug. "Thank you," Jake said, "for seeing it, for saying it, for being here." "Thank you for coming back," Marcus replied. They stood there for a moment, 2 men who'd been broken by life and were slowly being made whole again. Then Claire was there, and Tom, and Ruth, and one by one, the other veterans. They formed a circle around Ghost, hands touching her, touching each other, creating a living testament to the power of connection. The showcase continued, but Jake barely registered it. He was focused on Ghost, on the way she stood calm and centered while people touched her, thanked her, honored her. She'd done this work for 15 years at the fairgrounds, had helped countless people before Jake had found her again. This was her moment as much as anyone's. After the formal demonstrations ended, there was a reception. Jake stayed close to Ghost, Silver, and Phantom, watching people approach them with reverence. Children who'd been taught to fear horses found courage to touch Ghost's nose. Veterans from other programs came to ask questions, to learn, to be inspired. Patricia, who'd driven from Idaho for the event, stood with tears streaming down her face as she watched Silver interact gently with a child. "She's so different," Patricia said to Jake. "From the scared horse I knew to this. It's miraculous. It's family," Jake said. "It's what happens when we're where we belong." As sunset painted the sky, the crowd began to disperse. Jake led the 3 horses back to their trailer for the short drive home to the ranch. They loaded easily, all 3 now comfortable with the routine. Claire drove while Jake sat in the passenger seat, exhausted but content. "Hell of a day," Claire said. "Yeah." Marcus's speech was something else. It was. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Claire said, "Dad would have been proud of all of this. Of you." Jake thought about his father's letter, about the belt he wore every day now. I think maybe he was, in his way. His way was just quieter than most people's. Yeah, it was. Back at the ranch, they settled the horses in the barn. Jake spent extra time with each one, grooming them, checking them over, thanking them silently for all they'd given. When he reached Ghost, she pressed her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. The same gesture she'd made 21 years ago. The same gesture she'd made that first day at the fairgrounds when they'd found each other again. "We did good today, girl," Jake said softly. "You did good, you always do." Ghost's eyes were calm, knowing. She'd been doing this work longer than Jake had been doing anything. She'd been healing people, being present, offering connection, even when her own heart was broken. She was the teacher here, always had been. Jake spent that night on the porch, watching stars emerge, thinking about the chain of unlikely events that had led him here. His father's death, finding Ghost, learning about Phantom, discovering Silver. Each piece had been necessary, each loss had led to connection, each ending had been a beginning in disguise. Marcus was right. Healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant finding purpose in what you'd survived. The front door opened, and Claire stepped out with 2 beers. She handed him one and sat beside him. "To surviving," she said, raising her bottle. "To more than surviving," Jake corrected. "To living." They clinked bottles and drank. 2 people who'd found their way home through very different paths but had arrived at the same place, together, finally, where they'd always belonged. The morning after the showcase, Jake woke to his phone ringing. It was Ruth, her voice excited. "Turn on the news, Channel 7. Jake stumbled to the living room and switched on the television. There, on the morning news, was footage from yesterday's showcase. Marcus's speech, the 3 white horses, Jake standing in the arena surrounded by veterans. The anchor was speaking. This remarkable story of reunion and healing has captured hearts across the state. The therapeutic riding program in Ironwood, Montana, demonstrates the powerful impact of human-animal bonds in treating trauma. We're now joined by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychologist specializing in PTSD treatment. The interview discussed the science behind equine therapy, the growing need for alternative PTSD treatments, the success rate of programs like the one in Ironwood. They showed more footage, including close-ups of Ghost, Silver, and Phantom. Jake's phone started ringing. Calls from news stations, magazines, even a documentary filmmaker interested in telling Ghost's story. Claire emerged from her room, looking equally stunned. "We're going viral," she said, scrolling through social media on her phone. The video of Marcus's speech has been shared thousands of times. Over the next few days, the attention intensified. A national morning show requested an interview. A major equestrian magazine wanted to do a feature. Most importantly, other therapeutic riding programs began reaching out, asking for guidance, wanting to replicate Ironwood's success. But with attention came scrutiny. Questions about the program's sustainability, about whether one location could handle the demand, about how to scale the model without losing its personal touch. Jake, Ruth, Marcus, and Claire gathered at the ranch to discuss the future. "We've been approached by 5 different counties," Ruth said. "They want to start their own programs. They're asking for our help." "That's good, right?" Claire asked. "It's overwhelming," Ruth admitted. "We're a small operation. I don't know if we have the capacity to take on mentoring other programs." Jake had been thinking about this. What if we didn't mentor them directly? What if we created a framework, a guide based on what we've learned here? We could document our process, our successes, our challenges, make it available to anyone who wants to start a similar program. "That's a massive project," Tom said. "It is, but it's also our responsibility. Ghost helped us understand something that works, something that matters. We owe it to other veterans, other communities, to share that." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll help. So will the other vets. We've lived this. We can speak to what works and what doesn't." "I can handle the veterinary protocols," Tom offered. "And I can manage the operational side," Claire added. "The business structure, the partnerships, the financial sustainability." Ruth looked around the table at this unlikely team. "Then we do it. We document everything. We create something that can outlive us, a legacy." "Ghost's legacy," Jake said. Over the next month, they worked like they'd never worked before. Jake and Marcus interviewed every veteran who'd been through the program, documenting their experiences. Tom compiled veterinary best practices. Ruth detailed the training protocols. Claire built financial models and partnership frameworks. They worked in the ranch kitchen, papers and laptops covering every surface, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. Ghost, Silver, and Phantom often stood at the pasture fence closest to the house, as if watching over the work. The documentary filmmaker arrived in late spring. Her name was Jennifer Yang, and she spent 2 weeks in Ironwood filming everything: the therapy sessions, the daily care of the horses, interviews with Jake, Marcus, Ruth, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by Ghost. One afternoon, Jennifer filmed Jake with Ghost in the barn, asking him to tell the story from the beginning. Jake talked about finding her in the ravine, about the 3 months of healing, about the 5 years they'd been inseparable. He talked about her disappearance, his search, his eventual departure from Ironwood. "Why did you really leave?" Jennifer asked. Jake had been expecting this question, had been avoiding it in his own mind. But sitting there with Ghost, he found he could answer honestly. "Because I didn't know how to live with loss." Ghost disappeared, and instead of accepting that some questions don't have answers, I left. I thought if I went far enough away, I could escape the grief. But you don't escape grief, you carry it. The question is whether you carry it alone or with people who understand. And now? Jake ran his hand along Ghost's neck. "Now I know that healing isn't about escaping pain, it's about finding purpose within it. Ghost did that for 15 years before I came back. She taught people that survival is worth something, that connection matters, that broken things can find wholeness." Is she broken? She was. We all were. But broken doesn't mean unfixable. It just means the shape is different than it was before. Jake looked directly at the camera. "Ghost's story isn't about a horse that was saved. It's about a horse that saved herself and then spent years saving others. I was just lucky enough to find her again and be part of what she'd built." Jennifer lowered the camera, tears in her eyes. "That was perfect. The project culminated in a guidebook released in early summer, Ghost's Legacy, a framework for equine-assisted therapy programs, was distributed free to any organization that requested it. Within weeks, programs were starting in 6 different states, all based on the Ironwood model." Jake watched this expansion with mixed emotions. Pride that they'd created something replicable, fear that the personal touch would be lost in scaling. But Marcus reminded him that the guide was just a starting point. Each program would find its own path, just as Ironwood had. "We're not trying to clone what we built," Marcus said. "We're trying to inspire others to build their own version. That's how change happens, one community at a time." The documentary premiered in September. Ghost, A Story of Coming Home aired on a major streaming platform and quickly became one of their most-watched documentaries. It told not just Ghost's story, but the stories of Marcus, Sarah, and a dozen other veterans whose lives had been transformed by the program. Jake watched it with Claire, Ruth, Tom, and Marcus in the ranch living room. It was strange seeing himself on screen, hearing his own words, watching the story unfold from an outside perspective. But what struck him most was Ghost. The camera had captured something essential about her patience, her presence, her fundamental understanding that healing requires time and trust. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Marcus said, "That's going to change a lot of lives." He was right. Within days of the documentary's release, donations flooded in. Requests for the guidebook tripled. News outlets from around the world reached out for interviews. Ghost's story had touched something universal, something people needed to believe in. But through all the attention, the core work continued. Every Tuesday and Thursday, veterans came to the fairgrounds for therapy sessions. Every day, Jake and Claire ran the ranch, cared for the horses, built the life they'd nearly lost. Every Sunday, the team met to discuss challenges, celebrate successes, and plan for the future. And through it all, Ghost remained Ghost, calm, present, endlessly patient. She worked with veterans, allowed children to pet her, stood for interviews and photo shoots, but never lost her essential nature. She was still the horse Jake had found in a ravine 21 years ago, still teaching lessons about resilience and trust and the possibility of coming home. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains gold and red, Jake sat with Ghost in the barn. Silver and Phantom dozed nearby, content in the family they'd built. Jake thought about everything that had happened. His father's death, finding Ghost, the fundraiser, bringing Phantom home, discovering Silver, the showcase, the documentary. All of it had been necessary. All of it had led here. "You knew, didn't you?" Jake said softly. "You knew I'd come back, knew I'd find you, knew all of this would happen." Ghost regarded him with those dark, knowing eyes. Of course she hadn't known. She was a horse, operating on instinct and learned behavior and the basic drive to survive. But there was wisdom in that survival, wisdom in waiting, wisdom in continuing to offer connection even when your own heart was broken. "Thank you," Jake said, "for waiting, for forgiving me for giving up, for showing me what it means to come home." Ghost pressed her forehead against his chest, over his heart, the same gesture she'd made countless times. A greeting, an acceptance, a bond that transcended words. Jake stood there, holding his horse, feeling the weight of everything they'd survived together and apart. And he understood finally what his father had known. Home wasn't a place, it was a choice, a commitment, a decision to show up every day and do the work even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, home was a white horse who remembered you after 21 years and taught you that some bonds are stronger than time, stronger than trauma, stronger than anything that tries to break them. 6 months later, on a clear morning in early spring, Jake stood in the ranch pasture watching Ghost, Silver, and Phantom graze together. The 3 white horses moved in synchronized harmony, a family unit so natural it was hard to remember they'd once been scattered across 3 states, separated by years and circumstance. Claire joined him at the fence, coffee mugs in hand. She passed him one without speaking, and they stood in comfortable silence. The ranch was thriving. The partnership with the therapeutic riding program had stabilized their finances. The barn was full of healthy horses. The land their father had worked so hard to preserve was secure for another generation. "Marcus called," Claire said eventually. "His daughter is coming to visit next month. First time in 5 years. That's good. He wants to introduce her to Ghost. Says he owes his relationship with her to what he learned here." Jake smiled. That was the thing about healing. It rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict or measure. Marcus's recovery had repaired his relationship with his daughter. The documentary had inspired programs in 14 states. Ghost's story had given hope to thousands of people who needed to believe that broken things could be made whole. Ruth's car pulled up the drive. She emerged carrying a folder, her expression excited. "County approved the expansion," she announced. We can add 6 more horses to the program. And we got a grant for a covered arena so we can work year-round." "That's wonderful," Claire said. "It's more than wonderful. It means we can double the number of veterans we serve." Ruth looked at Jake. "And it's all because you came back, because you found Ghost." "I think it's more accurate to say Ghost found me," Jake replied. "I was just smart enough to recognize what she was offering." Tom's truck appeared next, and soon the whole team was gathered. They'd fallen into this routine, these Sunday morning meetings where they planned the week ahead, celebrated victories, addressed challenges. It felt like family. Not the family Jake had been born into, but the one he'd chosen, the one that had chosen him back. After everyone left, Jake walked to the barn. Ghost was in her stall, Silver and Phantom on either side. Jake had moved them inside last night due to a spring storm, and they'd been content to stay in the warmth. He approached Ghost, and she lifted her head, regarding him with those calm, knowing eyes. Jake pulled out his phone and took a photo. Not for social media or the documentary or any public purpose, just for himself. A moment captured, proof that miracles sometimes happened in the most unlikely ways. Later, he'd email it to Bill Jessup in Wyoming, keeping his promise to send updates. Bill would write back with stories about Phantom's siblings, maintaining the connection that had made all of this possible. He'd send a copy to Patricia in Idaho, who'd saved Silver and given her a chance at family. He'd add it to the album that documented this journey, this impossible story of reunion and healing. But for now, Jake simply stood with Ghost, his hand on her neck, feeling her steady breathing, her solid presence. 21 years had passed since he'd first found her in that ravine. 21 years of separation, searching, and finally coming home. She pressed her forehead against his chest, right over his heart, and Jake closed his eyes. This was grace. This was redemption. This was proof that some bonds endure, no matter how much time passes or how far we wander. This was home, and it always had been.